Hey, Acers, and Merry Christmas to you. Even though it's only the 24th and tomorrow's technically Christmas, it's still one of those Scandinavian traditions that my wife introduced to me over 20 years ago when I first got together with her, and we always did our big Christmas thing as her family on the 24th. And I am grateful for it. It's been a lot of fun. So Nissa has already come. Now, I wanted to make another episode of What Inspires Me. And as you could see from the photo on the thumbnail for the slide, I'm going to talk about westerns. And westerns and western music and things like that, I have a complex relationship with that. So here's how it goes. First of all, some of the earliest movies that were ever made were westerns. Some of the very first movies that were made once Hollywood was obtained were westerns. And some of the oldest truly American music is western music. So it makes it one of the oldest kind of storytelling that's unique to our country. Science fiction also is something that became it still didn't start here in America, but it definitely became American in like the 1920s. And science fiction and westerns actually share a lot in common, especially considering that here in America is like one of the last times in recorded history that there was a true settlement frontier. And I mean that's the joke of how many ears does Captain Kirk have? He has a left ear, a right ear, and a final frontier. But what the funny thing is about it is that westerns are definitely and truly uniquely American. And that doesn't go to say that one of my favorite western movies of all time took place in America. As a matter of fact, probably one of my top favorite western movies of all time took place in Australia with Quigley Down Under. I love that movie. I think that is a perfect western, even though it doesn't take place in the West. But you also got to look at the films of Akira Kurosawa, the Japanese films of the 50s and 60s, especially, that were very much the samurai replacing the cowboy and giving us a western all over again. I mean, that's the kind of cool thing about the story of how Akira Kurosawa took the western and made the Seven Samurai. And then the American director, we'll look it up in a second. That would be John Sturges. He and the people who wrote the screenplay took it back from Akira Kurosawa and made a western out of it. And that kind of back and forth has continued to go. I mean, look at Clint Eastwood doing A Fistful of Dollars, which was an unauthorized remake of Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo. And then in turn, Yojimbo, which led to A Fistful of Dollars, Yojimbo also led to Bruce Willis's Last Man Standing, which was an authorized remake. And some other people have pointed out that Lucky Number 11 holds a lot in common with it as well. And that's very true. But the Western really does inspire so much of me and so much of media in general since then. I grew up with my dad watching John Wayne movies. Now, nobody embodies the cowboy and the cowboy toughness and perseverance better than John Wayne. He was the Duke. And the Duke is still one of the greatest of all cowboy movie actors. And I didn't know this until I watched a documentary on it, but when the Duke, John Wayne, who was born, he died in 1979, so he still died in my lifetime, but I would love to have known him. But he was born Marion Robert Morrison, and I'm actually distantly related to him. That's pretty cool. But Marion Robert Morrison, so when young Marion was on the set for some early Hollywood films, and he was helping out, he was coached on how to be a cowboy by none other than Wyatt Earp. And so Western movies, especially John Wayne and stuff, they still have very much a tie directly back to the cowboy era they're portraying. And I think part of the reason why it was inspirational to so many people and why so many cowboy movies were made is because it was so simple. Living in Dust Bowl looking desert California and having that canyon that you could just ride things up and down and change the camera angles and it looks like a different canyon. And you could have all sorts of things going on there. People still had herds of cattle you could rent from them for a day. And we said, hey, we want to stampede them through this area. And people could do the Western movies so easily. Now, on top of that, my dad, when I was a kid, he had a bookshelf that went down our entire hall. That was probably a 15, 20-foot hall. And he had built a bookshelf on there. And that bookshelf held mostly Louis L'Amour books. Again, another one of my distant relatives. Louis L'Amour, or Louis L'Amour, however is actually the correct pronunciation on that. But Louis L'Amour wrote cowboy stories. And many of his cowboy stories have been turned into Westerns on TV and in movies. And if you've ever heard associated with Westerns, if you've ever heard the name Sackett, that's associated right there with Louis L'Amour. Now, those books dealt with that iconic hero, the Western hero, who maybe he wasn't exactly a good guy or hadn't been a good guy. Look at William Money in, I think that was his name, in Unforgiven with Clint Eastwood. There's just that character that he plays, Money. He was a bad guy, and he had done bad things, but because he did the right thing, taking down a worse person, that made him into a hero. I know that Greek mythology has its share of anti-heroes, and other mythologies and legends and stories have their share of anti-heroes. But I think the Western capitalized on the anti-hero. The bad guy who's got just enough of a soft spot that when the school marm needs his help, that's the one person he couldn't say no to. And maybe there's a lesson for us as game masters there. Find that one person that your heroes can't say no to and put the pressure on. Make them really, really wish to be able to help that person. And so there are lots of good Western movies to see. Like I cited already, Quigley Down Under. That one there, interesting enough, he has a Sharps 50 caliber breech loading rifle. Now, I don't know if it was, I actually cannot remember if it was the Westerns or military movies, which I'm going to have to talk about military stuff on another video. But I don't know what exactly it was that inspired me to become knowledgeable about guns. I know that my dad taught me to shoot when I was a kid, and I'm grateful for that. And any person who teaches their son or their daughter to shoot, that can be a good thing, especially when you consider it's time spent with a parent or with a guardian or somebody who loves that child. And I'm not going to get into the politics of guns or anything like that. I'm just going to say that I became a gun aficionado and I understand guns and their powers and calibers and everything like that. As a matter of fact, the gun that I'm holding in the thumbnail here, it's not a real gun. It's a nice replica gun, but it is one of the earlier style. It was based on a 38 caliber revolver that was still a cap and ball revolver. So that's part of the reason why it took a while for, it's the line that's quoted in Quigley Down Under. They say God created all men, but Sam Colt made them equal. And those guns were sold during the Crimean War to both the British and the Russians. And Colt just kept going back and forth between the two, selling more guns, more handguns, more revolvers. And those things, it made more sense to own 4 of them or something like that to go into an engagement. Because as you click, boom, shot all 6 rounds, you dropped that gun and went to the next gun. Because you the until the cylinder began to be able to pop out and cartridges were available that were preloaded, and mainly even go further and say the center fire cartridge with the primer inside built inside the bottom of the base in the striking area. When until that center fire cartridge was invented, really, I mean, you could deal with rimfire cartridges. I will say that, but really, the cylinder pop out, the quick reload of a gun, and the real true benefit of a gun in a human to human fight did not become apparent or really readily available. There were rimfire cartridges. I mean, you talk about, again, going back to another great Western, Silverado. That is, it's a more recent Western. It's more recent than the good old John Wayne, but it is one of my favorite Westerns because Larry Kasdan, who is an amazing writer, he talked in there, he showed in there both rimfire and centerfire cartridges being used very effectively. The rimfire rifle is that McHenry rifle, that Henry rifle that Danny Glover's character ends up using, and his father had one and he had one, but that he ended up having to capture it back from the bad guys, and he's going in with two McHenry rifles. They're lever action not repeating rifles, but they're lever action rifles, and he was able to. He's sitting there spinning his rifles as he's going through, and he can tuck and pull, and that lever action was the first idea that, oh, we can mechanically advance the speed of the chambering. It was even faster than cocking and pulling the cylinder because, I mean, both of them had the limits of how many bullets they could hold in the gun, but they both were useful for riding and shooting, and that was again another advancement. Now, I am not saying that it is good to kill people. As a matter of fact, it is not a good thing, and it makes me hope that with my setup that I have, and with everything, all the legal things that I have passed, and all the everything that I have in my life, I hope I never ever have to fire a bullet at a human being. I pray that I never have to, because ultimately human life is precious. Every one of us is precious. Every one of you is precious. However, when our heroes that we're playing rise to challenge the villains that we as game masters control, that makes for a great story. And Westerns definitely have that hard-bitten edge, that ability to just keep your audience interested. I mean, I remember one of the John Wayne ones that I watched a lot when I was a kid was the Cowboys. And that is a unique one because it's one of the few John Wayne movies where John Wayne dies. Spoiler alert, but the movie's been out there forever. And this shows from a dramatic point how, at least in Savage Worlds, I would use a conviction Benny, because the great hero, the old cowboy who's been taking these 15 boys along on the cow trail, when he gets killed by the bad guys, and the boys have to finish the drive so that they can get that money back to their families. Westerns show dedication to family and to the rise of law and order and to the ending of violence. Because that's, in some Westerns, that's when the hero leaves, is once the violence is done. He gets on his horse and leaves because now the town can be at peace. And they've got the means of taking care of that. But sometimes the hero stays and becomes the sheriff or the marshal. And that's what happens at the end of Silverado. Again, spoiler alert. Sorry. But at the end of Silverado, he ends up staying actually who I would call the main character. I mean, because there's four main characters in Silverado. There's Emmett, his brother Jake. Emmett's played by, oh gee, I just forgot his name, but he's in Hunt for Red October, and he's just kind of a great grizzled looking actor. Jake is of course played by a young Kevin Costner. Peyton, who's played by the amazing Kevin Kline, and Danny Glover's Mal character, and each one of them and Kasdan is just a mastercraft storyteller. Of course, many of you know his handiwork from Empire Strikes Back. Larry Kasdan wrote Empire Strikes Back, and I'm going to do probably a whole episode on each of the three movies in the trilogy. But that's really kind of what I wanted to talk about, is how we can find inspiration from Westerns. I found inspiration from Westerns. I still do. One of my favorite settings in Savage Worlds to play is Deadlands. I love Deadlands, and it's in its daughter series games. So Deadlands Noir, I love that one. That's actually what got me back into role-playing games. Deadlands Hell on Earth, I will always love post-apocalyptic stories. And I'm going to definitely have to do a whole episode on post-apocalyptic. I'm playing Fallout 4 right now, and I'm recording the videos. So at some point, I'll post them up here online. And I give a verbal warning in this video. If you're under a certain age, that your parents don't feel comfortable with you watching those videos, please don't. Wait until you're older, because the game has bad language in it. Language that I try not to use even at my table. So that's Deadlands Hell on Earth, and of course Deadlands Lost Colonies, the one I'm reading up right now. And that's space western. That's kind of like Firefly. And see, there you go, a mashup of the two genres that I've already talked about here, western and space, and you get Firefly, which is so much fun. Probably one of my favorite stories that's been told, and it's still truly a science fiction, but it's got so much of the Western overlays. And if you tell a story that is one thing, but you tell it with another thing over the top, going back to Akira Kurosawa. He was telling Western stories, but doing it with a samurai overlay. And so it was able to tell a very good story that even American audiences loved. I think Seven Samurai is one of the greatest films that's ever been made. And I will have to talk about martial arts and things like that in another episode. This is just bringing up a lot of another episode things that I gotta definitely do for you guys. But I thank you for joining me, and I hope that you guys have a Merry Christmas, that you guys get to spend time with your family, maybe even run a game for them. Tell me how that goes. And again, thanks for being here. Thank you for being part of Ace Role Playing Games. Thank you for being here on this earth right now, because this earth is better because you're on it. And the world is a better place because you're in it. And I know that I am grateful for you guys, and I love you. I love that you guys got me an 1,800 plus view of a short that I made, and I'm grateful to all of you. So again, Merry Christmas, and I'll talk to you next week, just before the new year.